My Lords, back in 2022, when the nutrient neutrality rules came in, it started a 3.5-year hiatus that has prevented the building of new affordable homes, the bankruptcy of local architects, the closure of local builders merchants, the liquidation of many smaller builders and the folding of so many white van journeyman contractors, the plumbers, the plasterers, the ground workers, roofers and tilers. And what was the basis of this catastrophe? Well, my Lords, as a council leader, I sought to find out. And it didn't take long to identify Natural England as the culprit, so I asked them for their reasoning. And they advanced a theory that there was complete equivalence between the application of a single kilogram of phosphate anywhere in a catchment, regardless of the distance from the special area of conservation that needed protection under the regulations. They fundamentally refused to countenance the sort of risk-based approach that would be advanced in any other walk of life or by any other regulator. And their approach was that the flushing of a lavatory directly into the protected Surlingham Broad was absolutely equivalent to going to the loo in Shipton, over 30 miles away, along a convoluted network of ditches, streams, tributaries and rivers, before those rivers passed by the Surlingham Broad. My Lords, is nonsense. I don't deny there might be some infinitesimally small theoretical riparian link between the lavatory in Surlingham and the toilet in Shipton. But anyone who has studied for an O-level in GCSE or maths knows that the area around a point increases with the square of the distance. So the effect of the loo in Shipton would be 30 times 30, that is 900 times less impactful. That is, if the water from that loo didn't percolate into the aquifer, become assimilated into the littoral plants, absorbed onto soil particles, or carried away in the farmer's crops, in which case the impact would be significantly less, and it is. The designated person, when I asked, said, as there are no major processes for permanent phosphate losses within the aquatic environment, the nutrient neutrality approach is to assume that all phosphorus will at some point reach the site, albeit it may take varying lengths of time, and therefore there's a possibility of it contributing to eutrophication impacts now or in the future. My Lords, you don't have to be a scientist to realise that bathtub principle is poppycock. I asked them for the scientific evidence. They sent me a slim paper repeating their assertions with a long list of academic references. So I read them. My Lords, the academic references that Natural England said supported their position argued the reverse. They made it clear there were major processes for the permanent phosphate losses from the aquatic environment. And as I said in the previous group, this is my specialist subject. Before I joined your Lordship's House, I gave evidence to the Built Environment Committee on this point. I will not list all the ways in which I said the scientific papers contradicted Natural England's stance, but in summary, they disregarded a whole variety of natural mitigation factors, including confusing adsorption with absorption, denying percolation to the underlying aquifer, ignoring the precipitation of phosphates in the calcareous soils that are found in the Yare catchment and along the River Wensum, the related effects of high soil pH, locking up high phosphates, the dilution of rainwater and flows out to sea, and the incorporation and deposition of organic manures in the crops and along the brooks and streams. My Lords, the ban on house building has been advanced on a completely unscientific, false premise, and one cooked up by Natural England. In short, Natural England's interpretation of the scientific literature was misleading and mendacious. Their justification used selective quotation to misrepresent the balance of evidence. Now, under the regulations, the test is one of significant harm. Natural England misdirected themselves and advised ministers to substitute the word significant with any. How can they be trusted if they act in this way? The misrepresentation of the risk of flushing toilets in new homes has allowed itself to prosecute a war on the house building industry without justification. They are the enemies of growth. And my Lords, I can hardly believe I'm going to say what I'm just about to say. This is probably the once and only time I believe with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, because she has fingered Natural England in the article in the Times related to by the noble Lord Russell as those being the enemies of growth. Further, I then scrutinised Natural England's nutrient calculator, which I found it to be loaded with flaws and poor assumptions.
The noble Lord, which amendment is it he's referring to?
I'm talking to all of them, but particularly the ones in the name of my noble friend Baroness Coffey, but also 333. There's more. So I scrutinised the Natural England's nutrient calculator, and it used the wrong digital elevation model. It used the wrong areas of influence from sewage treatment works. No allowance was made for excess capacity in the treatment works. I'm going to come to a very important point in a moment. The incorrect number of residents per property was assumed, which is a significant area where there's holiday homes, and it assumed a much greater water consumption in each house than we knew to be the case. The numbers of manures coming from outdoor pig units was underestimated by somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times by reference to the DEFRA booklet RB209. Suffice to say, their calculator is orders of magnitude adrift, and then there was a completely arbitrary 20% buffer applied over and above their calculated number for no justifiable reasons. My lords, it was all very shoddy, but the dodgy statistics have resulted in an extra £5,000 to £15,000 extra tariff per home for every house built in what is essentially the entirety of the district in which I live and the two neighbours. Now, my point of raising these points is, for all its manifest shortcomings, this bill contemplates that we will reward this quango with new powers to simultaneously, I'm going to list them, advise the government as to the science, measure the extent of the problems, assess the various limits, suggest policy remedies, presumably applies on the drafting of regulations, become the regulator, act in judgment of all the mitigation processes, devise their own schemes in competition with private interests, no conflict there, price their own schemes, whilst, as I have experienced in pursuing some of these things, loading the private alternatives with cost, operating their own EDP schemes, compulsorily purchase land in pursuance of their schemes, and take so much time to do it that we'll be lucky if any stalled homes are released by the end of this Parliament. Now, I like the idea of Natural England, but I do not think they are a fit organisation to undertake this work. But even if they were, this bill would make them simultaneously judge, jury and executioner, as a monopoly supplier of advice, interpretation and remedy as a self-governing, unaccountable quango. I've not been in your lordship's house long, but I know a conflict of interest when I see one. And not only that, but obvious grounds for judicial review. If Natural England had any sense, they would see the jeopardy they are being placed in. We are being asked to make statute law where there is no separation of duties between a single monopoly operator acting as regulator and operator with a fiscal incentive and conflicts of interest to set fees to suit themselves, and in so doing crowding out what is actually starting to be developed as a globally significant, innovative private mitigation industry. 3.5 years down, at least 3.5 years to go, at best 7 years of not building, these enemies of growth have no regard for the wider economy and the plasterers, plumbers, carpenters and tilers. So I totally support my noble friend Baroness Coffey with all her amendments, and my noble friend Baroness Mackintosh, when we say that actually we need a different approach to this. Supporting a single regulator, a single organisation, to do all those multifarious things cannot be the right thing, especially when their track record is one of ignorance of the science and the mendacity to misinterpret it, not just to the public, but to ministers, the industry, and everybody else.
Yeah.